Who really built the pyramids of Egypt? For more than 4 millennia, the silence of the Egyptian desert's dunes has guarded an ancient whisper, a question that refuses to die. It slips through the scorching winds of the Sahara, echoes through the solemn corridors of the necropolises, and vibrates like a primordial echo among the stone colossi that defy time itself. Who built the pyramids? The version told by scribes in schoolbooks speaks of legions of devoted workers, bound to the sacred will of living gods, the pharaohs. But what if that version is merely the shell of a far deeper enigma? There, on the Giza Plateau, rests the most mysterious of them all, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, a monument so colossal, so precise, so unfathomable that not even modern engineering or machinery can fully explain how it was possible. There is no mortar, no error, no apparent logic, only the impossible. And it is within this impossible that a question begins to scream for answers. Have we, generation after generation, been repeating an incomplete story? Or worse, a carefully crafted lie? Because maybe the pyramids aren't just tombs, maybe they're portals, codes, warnings, and maybe the real question isn't how were they built, but rather who doesn't want the truth to be known? On this journey, we will pierce the veils of time. We will explore hidden documents, theories buried like heresies, and archaeological discoveries that will never make the front page. What is about to be revealed is not just history, it is a calling, because sometimes the past does not want to be forgotten. It wants to be unearthed. It all supposedly began around 2,600 years before Christ. The Fourth Dynasty was asserting its dominance over ancient Egypt, radiating the splendor of an empire at the peak of its power. On the throne sat Khufu, or as the world would come to know him centuries later, Cheops, a god among men, a ruler shrouded in mystery, fear, and divine ambition. It was under his command, according to the records embraced by traditional historiography, that a feat would rise to pierce the skies of the desert. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the most imposing, precise, and enigmatic structure ever built by humankind. Textbooks say it took 20 years. Tens of thousands of men, initially estimated at 100,000, later revised to 20,000, hauling blocks of up to 60 tons across an unforgiving, arid terrain, under a sun that scorched like divine judgment. No cement, no modern machinery, just ropes made of plant fiber, copper chisels, and blind faith in the pharaoh. The narrative is reinforced by names like Herodotus, the father of history, who, centuries after the pyramid's construction, penned a dramatic account, exhausted laborers sleeping among stones, whipped by duty. But time, like the desert, both buries and reveals. And indeed, what was once held as absolute truth now creaked at the foundations of doubt. Modern archaeology has already dismantled parts of the myth. It's now known that many workers were well-fed, paid, and housed in nearby workers' villages. Herodotus got it wrong, yet his version endured, and it still echoes in classrooms, documentaries, encyclopedias, the image of Egypt as a slave empire, building titanic tombs with primitive tools. But then you pause. You look at the pyramid's exact measurements, its alignment with the stars, the precision of the stone cut, the absence of error, and a sacred question rises like an obelisk in the mind. Does this really make sense? Or have we for centuries told the story just the way someone wanted us to believe? To this day, no sarcophagus bearing his sacred body has ever been found. No proclamation etched in stone has survived the test of millennia intact. What remains are echoes, scattered fragments from later eras, written records composed thousands of years after his death, and a single inscription, crude, unsettling, carved deep within a hidden chamber of the pyramid, only accessed centuries after its construction. Khufu, a solitary name on a barren wall. No honor, no artistry, no context, as if someone had hastily signed it or tried to leave behind a trace, best kept buried. And then comes the disturbing contrast. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with symbolism, with immortalizing their deeds. Even the humblest tombs are adorned with text, spells, hieroglyphs, curses. But in the greatest pyramid ever built, nothing. No narrative, no royal cartouche, not a whisper of a soul. The Great Pyramid stands silent, impenetrable, ownerless. It's as if whoever designed it never wanted to be remembered, or worse, as if if someone erased them from history. And within that void, in that millennial silence, heavier than the granite itself, a dangerous question begins to stir once more. Was Khufu truly the architect of eternity, or just a name thrown into the shadows to conceal something far greater? Much of what the world thinks it knows about the pyramids doesn't come from architect nor engineer, not even eyewitness. It comes from a man who walked the sands of Egypt 2,000 years after the first stone was laid on the Giza Plateau. His name was Herodotus, called by some the father of history, and by others more skeptical the father of lies. Around the 5th century BC, this Greek traveler journeyed through the Nile Valley with curious eyes and attentive ears, recording everything the local priests were willing to share. It was Herodotus who wrote that the pyramid of Khufu took 20 years to build, that 100,000 men, working in rotating shifts, moved titanic stones with bare hands and blind faith. But there's something few stop to consider. Herodotus didn't see. He listened, then wrote. His accounts are a tapestry woven with myth, speculation, and perhaps poetic exaggeration. He spoke of flying serpents in the desert skies, of mystical machines levitating stone blocks, of an Egypt shaped not only by human hands, but by mud, gods, and sorcery. Herodotus was, perhaps, humanity's first great storyteller, a chronicler of the improbable, a poet cloaked in the guise of a historian. And still, or maybe because of that, his version of the pyramids was canonized, repeated for centuries like sacred doctrine, printed in encyclopedias, dramatized in films, taught as fact. But if his sources were oral, if he saw the world through eyes enchanted by legend and miracle, why do we believe his words so unquestionably when it comes to the pyramids? The answer may lie in the nature of power, in the convenience of ready-made certainty, or in the cowardice of those who, for too long, have avoided the most unsettling question of all. What if Herodotus was wrong? Or worse, what if his version was chosen precisely because it concealed a far more dangerous truth? The official story is repeated with near liturgical certainty. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built in just 20 years. 20 years. Over 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 60 tons, quarried, carved, transported, and placed with a precision that borders on the impossible. No machines, no engines, no advanced technology, just copper tool, plant fiber ropes, and the sheer strength of thousands of human arms beneath the blistering desert sun. But then time demands its logic, and the math begins. 2.3 million blocks divided over 20 years. That's over 300 blocks per day, more than one block, set in place every 2 minutes, without pause, without error, day and night for 20 years. No rest. Not even a modern empire, armed with cranes, GPS, drones, and reinforced concrete, has dared to replicate such a feat with the same exactitude. Every modern attempt at reconstruction ends in frustration or awkward silence. And yet, we keep repeating, they did it with primitive tools. We overlook the logistical nightmare of feeding legions of workers, of building monumental ramps that would have to be larger than the pyramid itself, of preventing collapse, controlling angles, aligning blocks to true north. We ignore it, perhaps because it's more comfortable to accept the legend. Easier to cling to the version we were given than to confront the abyss that opens when logic steps in, and then the doubt rises like an obelisk in the face of reason. Was the pyramid really built in 20 years? Or was that timeline crafted to fit within our own limitations, to conceal a truth we never dared to consider? Because sometimes when mathematics challenges mythology, it's not the equation that's wrong, it's the history that was rewritten to seem possible. For centuries, the image was etched into our minds as if part of the desert itself. 100,000 men in perpetual suffering, dragging colossal blocks beneath the merciless sun, whipped by cruel overseers, building the glory of a pharaoh who would never know their names. That's what Herodotus wrote. That's what the world believed. And for a long time, it was all we had. But then, the very soil of Egypt began whispering a different tale. Recent excavations, carried out with the tools of modern science, uncovered organized workers' villages, communal kitchens, high-value cattle bones, evidence of advanced medical care, and honorary tombs for the men who worked there. They weren't slaves. They were specialists, masters, artisans, elite stonemasons, ancient engineers, architects with knowledge that would challenge even modern logic. Well-fed, well-treated, paid in bread, meat, fish, and beer. There weren't 100,000. There were around 20,000 trained, organized, rotating crews, moving mountains. Quite literally, this revolution revelation changes everything. It dismantles the myth of blind suffering and raises a new one. The myth of skill beyond time. Because even with all that, 20,000 men moving millions of blocks across hostile terrain under unforgiving climate, with no bulldozers, no tracks, no modern engineering, the equation still doesn't add up. The technique is impressive, yes, but the scale defies. Logic faltered and mystery draws near. Are we underestimating something? A lost knowledge? A forgotten science? Or something deliberately buried? Maybe the true builders were not just workers. Maybe they were guardians of a secret not meant to be understood, but to be preserved. The explanation most commonly accepted by academic voices is straightforward, almost too straightforward. The Great Pyramid of Giza, they say, was built with sand ramps, wooden rollers, crude ropes, and copper tool, a soft, malleable metal docile compared to the granite it was meant to tame. The theory paints a nearly naive picture. Men dragging titanic blocks with sleds and levers, slowly ascending inclined ramps, driven by the shouts of overseers and their faith in the pharaoh, and for a moment it almost seems plausible. But then, time demands logic, and logic unravels the spell. To reach the summit of the pyramid, the tallest stone structure of the ancient world, those ramps would have needed to be larger than the pyramid itself, kilometers long, built from millions of tons of compacted sand and brick, a second monument as colossal as the first. And then what? It would all have to be demolished, erased without a trace. No base, no debris, not a grain. But to this day, nothing has ever been found. No ramp foundation, no markings, not even a shadow in the soil, nothing. And the tools? Copper, a metal that barely scratches the rose granite of Aswan, the very stone used to carve the pyramid's internal chambers with millimetric precision. Even using dolerite hammers, the process would be brutally slow, crude, nearly impossible. Modern tests have attempted to replicate the feat. Universities, engineers, specialists. The result? Frustration, failure, complete inefficiency. And so, in the face of modern science's shortcomings, the question rises like an uncarved obelisk. If this was all done with basic tools and sand ramps, why has no one, in over 4,000 years, managed to do it again? The answer may lie where no one dares to look, in forgotten or hidden techniques, in knowledge that slipped through the cracks of history or was buried on purpose, because maybe the pyramid isn't just a tomb. Maybe it's a riddle, a silent testament to an engineering that was never meant to exist. And the more we seek answers, the more the sand seems determined to hide them. The grandeur of the Great Pyramid of Giza lies not only in its form, but in its matter, in the raw essence of Earth, shaped with superhuman precision. It's not just a mountain of stones. It is a miracle of geological selection and impossible transport. Most of the pyramid's core was carved from limestone quarried locally around the plateau, but its outer casing, now mostly worn away by time, was once covered in a layer of pure white limestone, so smooth and bright that under the desert sun it shimmered like sacred marble. This material, however, wasn't local. It came from Tura, 12 kilometers away, and deeper still, in the pyramid's heart, in its royal chambers, in its hidden corridor, rests something even more extraordinary. Pink granite, acid, nearly impenetrable. But this granite wasn't born in Giza. It was extracted nearly 900 kilometers to the south, from the quarries of Aswan, a scorching, mountainous, ancient region. Now pause, breathe, and try to imagine what this truly means. Tons upon tons of stone, some weighing over 50 tons, dragged across nearly 1,000 kilometers. No wheel, no engines, no track, no paved roads. The traditional explanation, they used the Nile. They transported the blocks on rudimentary boats, then dragged them across the desert sands with sleds. But again, logic starts to unravel. How do you unload a 50-ton block from a boat without cranes? How do you drag it across uneven terrain, up inclined ramps, and set it into place with sub-millimetric precision? No cracks, no misalignments, no room for error. And the most glaring question of all, how did they cut the granite? Copper, the metal used at the time, is softer than the granite itself. Even with dolerite hammers, it would take hundreds of hours to cut a single block, and even then, with visible imperfections. Yet what we see in the pyramid's chambers are straight cuts, precise, clean cuts that challenge even modern industrial saws. So once again, the question doesn't just present itself, it demands to be heard. How did they really do it? Or, more precisely, who or what possessed the technology and knowledge to perform such a feat over 4,000 years ago? Because perhaps the secret isn't just in the stone, but in who moved them and why they made sure that knowledge would never survive. If the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza already sounds like an engineering miracle, then its alignment with the cosmos borders on the divine. It doesn't just point upward, it points to the infinite. This colossal structure is oriented with astonishing precision to the four cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, with a deviation of less than 0.05 degree. Not even our modern machines, armed with GPS, drones, and industrial lasers, can replicate this alignment with such exactitude, and yet this marvel was erected over 4,000 years ago, with naked eyes, calloused hands, and primitive instruments, or so we're told. But that's only the threshold of the mystery. Astronomical studies conducted by physicists, archaeoastronomers, and engineers have revealed that the layout of the three great pyramids of Giza astonishingly mirrors the position of the three stars in Orion's belt. Orion, the hunter, the eternal traveler of the heavens. In Egyptian mythology, his celestial counterpart was Osiris, the god of death, renewal, and eternity. This theory, known as the Orion correlation hypothesis, proposes that the ancient architects were not merely building tombs, they were mapping the heavens onto earth, as if carving constellations in stone, as if raising celestial portals anchored between worlds. And so arise two questions that challenge modern intellect. How could a civilization without telescopes, compasses, or satellites align their monuments with such cosmic precision? And more importantly, why? Why gaze at the sky with such devotion? Why seal the eternity of the pharaohs with the mark of the stars? Were the pyramids mere tomb or structures of transition designed to elevate the soul to the firmament? Were they codes, maps, relics of a forgotten wisdom? What once seemed merely grand now whispers like a lost secret. Perhaps the Great Pyramid is not a monument. Perhaps it is a mirror, an astronomical key, an anchor point between what is above and what is below. Because if the ancient Egyptians could read the sky with such precision, then perhaps they knew far more than we imagine. Or perhaps they weren't just Egyptian. In 2013, something emerged from the depths of the Egyptian desert that made the world hold its breath. On the forgotten shores of the Red Sea, at the ancient port of Wadi al-Jarf, archaeologists discovered a set of millennia-old papyri preserved against time, as if waiting for the right moment to be read. Among them, one quiet yet powerful artifact would come to be known as the Diaries of Mirror, the oldest known papyrus document ever found. Mirror, a common name, yet one that would echo across the centuries as an eyewitness to a living legend. He was a construction inspector, and in his records he documented the day-to-day operations of a monumental task, the transport of white limestone block from the Tura quarries to the base of Giza by boat. Specially designed vessels navigating artificial canals along the Nile, arriving at a port near the Great Pyramid. For many, this was the missing piece, the definitive proof that the pyramid had been built through human planning, labor, and logistical effort, a confirmation, a final answer. But was it really? Because what the Diaries of Mirror reveal is not the construction of the pyramid itself. They don't describe the cutting of granite. They don't explain the elevation of the core blocks. They make no mention of the hidden corridors, the astronomical alignments, or the impossible engineering. Mirror describes the transport of casing stones, and even then, only during the final years of Khufu's reign. In other words, the pyramid was already nearly complete. These records, though valuable, are part of the epilogue, not the prologue. They trace the final steps of the work, not the birth of the miracle. And so once again, silence speaks louder. Because if these diaries are celebrated as the key to the enigma, but don't touch the core of the mystery, is archaeology perhaps reading only the last page of a book whose first chapters were erased? Maybe the Diaries of Mirror don't explain. Maybe they confuse. Maybe they are just the surface of a much deeper riddle. And what remains for us is to keep digging, because the truth about the pyramids may not lie in what was written, but in what was carefully left out. As time yields and the sands retreat, Giza continues to speak. Each excavation reveals not just fragments of the past, but crucial pieces of a millennia-old puzzle. And one of the most striking revelations isn't found within the pyramid itself, but around it. Authentic tool, fully structured lodgings, organized cemetery, all just steps away from the colossal stone. stone wall. The workers' quarters sent a clear message. This was no improvised setup. Archaeologists uncovered bakeries, kitchens, communal spaces, food distribution networks, supply centers. It was a factory city, a construction site on a pharaonic scale, complete with logistics, hierarchy, planning, and purpose. The recovered tools tell a practical story. Stone hammers, copper chisels, rudimentary saws, and visible tool marks on limestone blocks. Proof of real use, real sweat, real labor. But soon the mystery returned. These tools work on limestone, but they're nearly useless against the pink granite of Aswan, used in the pyramid's inner chambers, where its heart resides, a material so dense it challenges even today's modern tool. And then there are the cemetery, organized, aligned, with simple yet respectful tombs, offering personal belonging, dignity. These were not graves for slaves. They were for men who were valued, men who died building something that transcended their own lives. These findings confirm something powerful. The Great Pyramid was not built under the lash of oppression, but through the coordination of an organized society with knowledge and infrastructure. But at the same time, they don't explain the impossible. They show us who lived there, who worked, who carried, but not who designed. They don't explain how dozens of ton blocks were placed with submillimetric precision. They don't reveal who charted the cosmic alignment. They don't tell us who knew exactly where each stone belonged, as if every block were part of a mathematical, astronomical, perhaps even sacred code. Archaeology has revealed the laborers. The true architect, remains in the shadows. And as long as that piece stays hidden, the enigma will remain more alive than ever. Among modern whispers of science, a recent hypothesis has emerged from the banks of the Nile, stirring intense debate among archaeologists and engineers alike. What if the answer has always been beneath our feet? Researchers from the University of Amsterdam, inspired by ancient depictions of sleds being pulled with liquid poured in front of them, decided to test a curious idea. They recreated Egypt's sandy terrain and moistened it with water and limo, the sticky silt left behind by the Nile's flood. The results were striking. The friction between sled and sand was cut in half. Human effort plummeted. The once loose, unstable sand became compact, firm, moldable. A slippery road emerged where there had once been only desert. The theory gained traction. The Egyptian, keen observers of nature, may have used mud, wet sand, and water as a natural lubricant to transport the stone. A clever solution. Simple.org, anecdote, and above all, plausible. But does it solve the enigma? Partly, perhaps. Yes, for smaller blocks. Yes, on flat ground. Yes, across short distances. But the pyramid isn't flat. It rises. It defies gravity, once reaching over 140 meters in height. And here, the mystery rises again, like the structure itself. How are dozens of ton blocks hoisted to the summit with submillimetric precision, using only mud, ropes, and human strength? How was the soil kept damp under a scorching 40-degree sun, in a land where every drop of water was precious? Where were the canals, the reservoirs, the infrastructure? None have been found. No solid evidence, no remnants to support this. At such scale, the mud theory is brilliant in its logic, but perhaps too logical for a feat so far outside the norm. It reminds us there was observation, strategy, natural knowledge, but it doesn't explain the impossible. It grazes the surface, but does not reach the core, because the true mystery of the pyramid is not just in how the stones move, but in how each one knew exactly where to stop. As if obeying a greater plan, as if guided not by brute force, but by a code, by a calculation, by a knowledge we still don't understand. The mud may have helped the men, but it doesn't explain the miracle. In ancient Egypt, even death demanded narration. Tombs or libraries of stone, where every wall told a story. Hieroglyphs, spells, curses, scenes of daily life, all meticulously carved to ensure that the soul of the deceased would never be forgotten. Immortality lived in the word, in the preserved name, in the eternal image. And then, before the greatest pyramid of all, rises a silence that defies the very Egyptian concept of eternity. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands mute. No name, no symbol, no prayer, nothing that clearly attributes it to its supposed creator, Khufu. No cartouche, no portrait, no sacred inscription. And for a people obsessed with documenting every detail of the journey to the afterlife, this is more than odd. It's troubling, disconcerting, almost inconceivable. The only mention of Khufu appears in an unreachable place, a hidden chamber known as the Relieving Chamber, above the King's Chamber, where no visitor set foot for centuries. In the name, it was discovered in 1837 by a British colonel named Howard Vyse. During excavations marked by explosions, dynamite, and controversy, Vyse found what he was looking for. But he found it too quickly, too conveniently. Some scholars whisper what few dare to write. What if Khufu's cartouche was forged? What if it never belonged to that chamber? The theory is bold, dangerous, but irresistible. Because if Khufu left no name on the pyramid, no inscription, no symbol, no claim of authorship, then who truly built it? And why go to such lengths to erase that authorship? As if someone or something wanted us never to know. Maybe the silence of the Great Pyramid isn't the absence of a message. Maybe it is the message, a deliberate void, a hidden code, a reminder that not everything can or should be revealed. Because in Egypt, where every stone speaks, this one refuses to say a single word. It's etched into the collective imagination. A scene repeated for centuries. Thousands of Jewish slaves sweating under the blazing desert sun, dragging colossal stones, crying out in pain beneath the whips of pharaohs, building the pyramids with blood and broken faith. Hollywood immortalized the image. Films like The Ten Commandments and The Prince of Egypt turned the narrative into visual poetry. Scriptures from many pulpits were interpreted literally. And so the myth spread like sacred truth. But now, with archaeology in hand, chronology in view, science speaks up. None of it is real. No Egyptian inscription mentions Hebrews enslaved to build pyramids. No tools, no bone. No trace in Giza connects the Hebrews to those titanic work. No record, no proof. And then the fatal blow, the timeline. The pyramids of Giza were built around 2600 BCE, but the earliest historical signs of a Hebrew presence in Egypt appear more than 1,000 years later. By the time the Great Pyramids stood silent and majestic for centuries, the Hebrews had not yet arrived in the Nile Valley. The myth was born from biblical tradition, nurtured by literal interpretations, strengthened by generations of faith, amplified by the dramatic power of cinema, not by evidence, but by symbolic necessity. A story more dramatic, more polarized, easier to control, and while the spotlight shone on a narrative of sacred oppression, the facts buried beneath the sand told another story, the real one. The builders were skilled Egyptians, organized into villages, well-fed, respected, buried with honor, not martyrs, but masters, not of stone, not of sorrow. The myth of the Jewish slaves is powerful, but like all fiction that lingers too long, it eventually blurred into truth. And perhaps that was always the goal, to rewrite the past in order to shape the present. But now, the sands have been stirred, and the real story is beginning to rise, block by block. What if everything we've learned about the pyramid is incomplete? What if those ancient stones, stacked with logic-defying precision, are not merely the result of ropes, ramps, and copper chisel? What if they are the last remnants of a knowledge older than history itself? There is a theory, dismissed by official voices, ignored by academic halls, but whispered by the world's monuments. The Egyptian pyramids are not an isolated creation. They may be fragments of a global legacy, traces of an ancestral civilization, forgotten or deliberately erased. A civilization that existed before all other, before the Sumerian, before the Egyptian, before history. And its name echoed from Plato's writing, Atlantis, a lost continent, destroyed by natural catastrophe, swallowed by the sea, erased from maps, but not from memory. According to this hypothesis, Atlantis was home to a highly advanced civilization, masters of engineering, astronomy, acoustics, mathematics, and perhaps even energy, technology beyond what we credit to ancient Egypt. And the survivors of its fall didn't vanish. They migrated. They carried fragments of their knowledge, mental maps, code, sacred geometries. They arrived in Egypt, in the valleys of Mesoamerica, in ancient China, in the underground cities of Turkey. And that is why we see pyramids in all these places. Similar shaped, familiar proportions, symbols that span oceans despite never having met. Coincidence or silent inheritance? Perhaps the Egyptian pyramids are not the beginning, but the continuation of something much older. Perhaps the Egyptians didn't invent the concept, but adapted a model lost in time. Of course, the guardians of traditional knowledge respond with skepticism. They they reject the theory. They dismiss the name Atlantis as philosophical myth, not historical fact. But in the face of such scale, such symmetry, such stellar alignment, how can we ignore the possibility? And so, a new question rises, just like the pyramids themselves. What if the true origin of these structures isn't on the banks of the Nile, but in the ashes of a civilization time tried to erase? Maybe Atlantis never fully sank. Maybe it still stands in stone, in silence, in code. In 1994, an idea struck the world like thunder across the sands. Egyptian author and engineer Robert Bauval introduced a theory that shook the foundations of traditional academic thought. According to Bauval, the pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure were not built to honor the earth, but to point to the heaven. A cosmic blueprint, a monument not meant for the world of the living, but for the throne of the gods. Bauval noticed something conventional archaeology had overlooked for centuries. The layout of the three pyramids mirrors, with remarkable precision, the three stars in Orion's belt, Al-Nitak, Al-Nilam, and Mintaka. It's not just a visual resemblance, it's a mathematical coincidence that spans millennia. When astronomical calculations are adjusted to reflect the night sky of 10,500 BCE, Orion's belt aligns perfectly with the layout of the pyramids, like an inverted mirror between heaven and earth, as if the ancient Egyptians carved with stone and intent an eternal star map. But why? In Egyptian mythology, Orion was Osiris, the god of death, resurrection, and final judgment. He who rules the afterlife. He who welcomes the souls of dead kings and transforms them into immortal gods. According to Bauval, the pyramids are not merely tombs. They are symbolic, or perhaps energetic, portal designed to launch the pharaohs into the cosmos, where they would reign beside Osiris. The theory became known as the Orion correlation hypothesis, and with it came a question that pierced through the centuries. How? How could a civilization more than 4,000 years ago know the exact position of stars in a sky from 12,000 years in the past? How could they have advanced astronomical knowledge, celestial observation tools more accurate than those accepted by mainstream archaeology? And above all, the spiritual and scientific motivation to align their greatest monuments with the stars? The answer may be even more unsettled. What if they weren't just observing, but following instructions? Instructions from someone or something that had known the sky long before them. And at this point, we cross a line. We step into the realm of the ancient gods of the star. Were these merely spiritual metaphors, poetic myths to explain the unexplainable, or distorted memories of real encounters? With beings whose knowledge was so advanced it could only be seen as divine, the pyramids still stand, silent, but perfectly aligned, as if awaiting the return of something that left long ago. What if the ancient Egyptian gods weren't just myths, but distorted memories of real visitors? This is the explosive proposal launched into the world in 1968, when Swiss author Erich von Däniken published his now famous book, Chariots of the Gods. The title became a forbidden whisper in the halls of science, but for millions, it was a question could no longer be ignored. According to Däniken and other proponents of the so-called ancient astronaut theory, civilizations like the Egyptians, the Maya, and the Sumerians didn't reach their heights of knowledge on their own. They had help from beyond. Beings with technology far beyond our comprehension, with pinpoint astronomical knowledge, with mastery over energy, sound, and matter that we've only begun to decipher in recent centuries. These gods didn't descend from the heavens in poetic metaphors. They landed and taught. In this scenario, the pyramids are not tombs, but geographical markers, energy reactors, transmitters, or perhaps memorials left behind for future civilization. And that's why so many ancient monuments around the world share inexplicable features: precision, cut stones that rival or surpass modern industrial saws, cosmic alignments with specific constellations, proportions based on universal constants like pi and the golden ratio. But then comes the thunderous question: how did these beings, whether human or not, move blocks weighing up to 60 tons without leaving behind a single tool, crane, or rail? This is where the theory becomes even bolder, more dangerous, more fascinating: unrecorded technology, lost science, or perhaps a form of energy that modern physics has yet to recognize. They didn't rely on brute force. They manipulated frequencies, sound, vibration, magnetic fields, or something we haven't yet named. The pyramids may be crystallized codes, messages left not just to honor the past, but to awaken the future. And the star gods? Perhaps they never really left. What if the pyramids weren't just built, but tuned? Among the boldest and most enigmatic theories is the hypothesis of sound levitation, proposed by scholars like British British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves and supported by a growing wave of independent researchers, this idea suggests something modern science barely understands: acoustic resonance. The concept is both fascinating and dangerous in its implication. The use of sound at specific frequencies capable of vibrating in harmony with the density of stone, altering its mass, or even making the blocks temporarily levitate. Yes, it sounds absurd, like science fiction, but this theory has echoed for millennia. Tibetan monks speak of instrument that lifts stones with chant. Andean tribes tell legends of sound that moves mountains. Even ancient Egyptian texts reference the divine breath, vibrations that mold, raise, guide. Modern studies have shown that certain sound frequencies can in fact move small objects, trigger resonance in solid structures, disintegrate, lift, or even manipulate matter without physical contact. And so, we return to the Great Pyramid of Khufu, a monument of stone, but with near-perfect acoustics. The internal chambers resonate like temples of sound, as if they were not just carved, but tuned. What if they weren't merely rooms, but massive resonators? Giant instruments designed to channel sound, and with it, energy, movement, mystery. Maybe the ancients didn't push the blocks. Maybe they made them dance with sound. And if that's true, then the Great Pyramid isn't just the largest tomb on Earth. It is a silent machine, a monumento vibrating at a forgotten frequency, waiting for someone to finally hear what it's always been trying to say. If all this still sounds improbable, then perhaps it's time to look where few dare to. The numbers carved in stone. The height of the Great Pyramid multiplied by 1 billion gives a value astonishingly close to the distance between the Earth and the Sun. The ratio between the perimeter of its base and twice its height reveals with millimetric precision the number pi. Its proportions follow the golden ratio found in the leaves of trees, in spiral galaxies, and in the human body. How? How could a civilization that, according to textbooks, lacked advanced mathematics manage to embed universal constants in stone? Did someone teach them? Or was this knowledge always here, and we simply forgot? Maybe what we call technological advancement isn't the pinnacle of evolution, but a late repetition of something that was lost once before in the 21st century. With satellites, supercomputers, and cutting-edge engineering, one would expect the Great Pyramid to have already surrendered all its secrets. But the latest studies reveal the exact opposite. In 2017, a team of French and Japanese scientists employed a revolutionary technique, muon tomography, internal scanning using cosmic rays. And what did they find? A massive hidden void concealed above the Grand Gallery, as large as the king's chamber, invisible, untouched, with no known access. No corridor leads to it. No inscription mentions it. It simply exists. How, why, for whom? Other studies have revealed that the pyramid responds to specific sound frequencies. It resonates. Sound waves propagate differently in each chamber, as if the monument were a massive stone instrument, carved not just to stand, but to vibrate, perhaps to channel energy, perhaps to communicate something we still don't understand. Chemical analyses have uncovered a compound between the blocks, a mineral sealant that never fully hardens, allowing micro-adjustment, resisting heat, earthquakes, erosion, and even time itself to this day. We cannot replicate it with precision. Multiple modern attempts using cranes, 3D software, and elite engineers have failed. Replicas collapse. Calculations don't align. The logistics are unworkable. No modern construction has matched the precision of the original pyramid. So let's be honest, if we can't do it today, why do we still believe that men with copper hammers and sand ramps did? Simply because the official story says so. The more we dig, the less we understand. Because sometimes the pyramid doesn't hide its secrets in stone, but in the silence surrounding it. There are stories that never make it into schoolbook, but live on in erased manuscripts, forgotten whispers, and accounts that time itself tried to bury. Medieval Arab chroniclers like al-Makrizi and Abd al-Latif wrote about Egypt centuries before modern archaeology, and their accounts are disturbing. They describe the pyramids not as tomb, but as vault of ancient knowledge. They spoke of underground tunnels connecting the monument, of sealed doors guarded by curses and unstable structures, of artifacts not made by human hand, energy spheres, unknown machine, and even the bodies of giant beings. Legends? Perhaps, but the question isn't whether it's all true. It's why these stories were ignored. and by whom. Medieval Arab chroniclers like al-Makrizi and Abd al-Latif wrote about Egypt centuries before modern archaeology, and their accounts are disturbing. They described the pyramids not as tombs, but as vaults of ancient knowledge. They spoke of underground tunnels connecting the monument, of sealed doors guarded by curses and unstable structures, of artifacts not made by human hands, energy spheres, unknown machines, and even the bodies of giant beings. Legends, perhaps, but the question isn't whether it's all true. It's why these stories were ignored, and by whom. In the 19th century, during the height of British excavations, the Royal Society documented phenomena that never made it into official records. Unpublished reports described metallic sounds, inexplicable resonances, and sudden shifts in air pressure inside the king's chamber. Some researchers reported vibrations in the floor, electromagnetic sensations, and instruments failing as they passed through certain corridors. But these documents were archived, reclassified as natural effect, or simply erased. Today, not all areas of the pyramid are accessible. Not to tourists, not to researchers, not even to foreign governments. Doors are sealed, passages closed off, and whenever a team requests access to sensitive zones, the answer is the same: denied, suspended, silenced. The official reason? Heritage preservation. But some say the real motive is different: fear of what might be found. Independent archaeologists report entire zones being sealed off after strange discovery. Reports disappeared, officials were paid keep quiet, and some structures, never revealed to the public, were deliberately buried. The question is no longer what was found, but what was hidden, because maybe what we're not allowed to see isn't an accident, it's a choice. And perhaps the greatest secret of the pyramid isn't how they were built, but everything that's been done to stop you from finding out who really left them behind. With so many gaps, contradictions, and discoveries that defy logic, one question lingers like cosmic dust over the stones of the pyramid. Why is the official version still upheld so forcefully? The answer isn't just in the stone, it's in the power of narrative, because those who control history control the present and shape the future. Since the dawn of civilization, history has been more than record-keeping, it has been strategy, a weapon in invisible territory. Who defines the past, defines who we are, where we come from, and, most importantly, how far we're allowed to go. Admitting that we don't know who built the pyramids, or that a civilization older, perhaps more advanced than any textbook allows once existed, would mean restarting humanity's entire timeline. And that wouldn't just be a scientific shock, it would be a political, cultural, religious, and educational earthquake. For modern Egypt, the pyramids are not just monuments, they are symbols of identity, of sovereignty, of power. They move billions in tourism. They place the country at the heart of ancient history. To say they weren't built by the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty, or that they belong to an older or even non-human legacy, is to challenge the soul of a nation. It is easier to preserve the myth than to open the door. To the uncomfortable, the academic world thrives on prestige, publications, and consensus. To challenge what's already established is to risk one's career, reputation, and funding. Even with evidence, data, and proof, those who propose outlier theories are often ridiculed, silenced, or erased. Because when prestige matters more than discovery, truth runs the risk of being buried beneath the very stones of the pyramid. Governments that uphold patriotic narratives, universities funded to confirm what's already accepted, religious institutions that cannot afford to confront sacred texts with inconvenient reality. Unearthing the full truth about the pyramids could mean toppling millennia-old power structure. And that is why, perhaps, the most dangerous truth of the ancient world isn't buried beneath the sand. It's in plain sight, sealed by convenience. Even after centuries of excavations, formulas, simulations, and digital reconstruction, the pyramids remain a question etched in the desert. Because at the heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza, there are still mysteries no laser has managed to penetrate. The internal chambers are deep, completely sealed off from natural light, and yet no soot, no smoke marks, no torches. How did they light the tunnel? How did they carve, align, and place stones with such precision in absolute dark? Copper mirrors, solar refraction, ineffective at such depth. The light, it seems, came from somewhere else or something else. The joints are so exact, a sheet of paper cannot pass between the stones. No laser levels, no GPS, not even modern squares. How did they achieve deviations smaller than a millimeter? millimeter? In a structure weighing millions of tons? Copper tools or geometric knowledge that, according to history, shouldn't have existed at the time? The official story says they were built to entomb pharaohs, but the Great Pyramid has never housed a body. No sealed sarcophagus, no funerary decorations, no offering. If it wasn't a tomb, then what was it? Some speak of an energy temple aligned with the Earth's telluric forces. Others suggest a stone library encoding universal formula. Some say it was an astronomical marker or even an interplanetary communication device. The truth? No one knows. And perhaps, just perhaps, that's the most honest answer of all. The purpose of this documentary is not to deny science, but to face it with courage, to confront the gap, the questions that have echoed for generations, the answers that were hidden, silenced, or simply ignored. Why? Because perhaps the greatest construction in human history was not built solely with brute force, nor only with faith. Maybe it was built with something we still don't understand, or worse, something some don't want us to understand. Because sometimes what is written in stone is more truthful than what's written on paper. And when history falls silente, the stones keep speaking. All it takes is ears willing to listen. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like to support the channel, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next documentaries. Thanks for watching. See you next time.